welcome to the show, the monthly show. I do this every month. I've been doing this for years now. For years I've been doing this show. And the idea is very simple premise, that the hardest thing to do for your chess improvement is also the best, which is to go over your own games. It's a very difficult process. And the idea that I had for the show is just to help and encourage people to do so. The most important part of this show is not me going over the games and whatever tidbits of spurious wisdom I can provide, but the notes that you see in front of you. So we have a board on the left. We're going to go through some of these games, and then we have the notes of the players on the right. In general, I do not go over games that aren't played at a slow time control and that don't have significant notes, because that is what I'm trying to help promote. In this last year of COVID, it feels a little bit like I've been a hypocrite because I haven't really been doing the work. And there's been times in my life in my chess life, where I've known that I need to go over my games, but it was simply too hard for me to confront it, and I let life get in the way. And so this whole COVID time has been a period in my life where I haven't been doing what I think is the real work. And I'll probably have a rude awakening when I play my first tournament at the end of May. So basically a month from now, I'm going to be playing a pretty hectic tournament over the board, GM norm tournament, yada, yada, 9 rounds. I assume the chess world will look completely differently. I assume I'm going to be playing kids who have Puzzle Rush scores of 47, but have an over the board rating of 1800, So I'm gonna have to really work. And in those games, if I win, I get nothing. And if I lose everything. And what I mean by that is just to say, I think the chess world is going to look different from what I remember it when I come back. How different it'll be? Good question. No one knows, but it is coming back. And so I'm hoping that there's going to be a transition in the dojo. It probably won't happen by the next game review, but very soon thereafter, where most of the games we're looking at are going to be games that were played over the board. And I'm going to try to do a lot more of my own, let's call it hopefully serious study. When instead of doing this ridiculous 2,700 quest thing, I'm going to try to do more earnest study myself, streaming it. Though it's a little weird for me because I still like the real board when I'm doing the streaming. Okay, what is a slow time control? Well, the fastest we have today was 30 plus 30. That's still pretty fast. I guess I would prefer 45, 45, or 90, 30. That's right. Okay. So, why must I lose the idiot is in the chat, and let's take a look at this beautiful scene I created. Why must I lose this idiot? Played. Ding Loren. And I'm just going to tell a funny story maybe to start it off since he's in the chat. I, got the game, and I didn't look at who was playing or anything. And a lot of Ding's moves, and let me just preface it by saying, I think Ding is playing the most interesting chess in the world right now. He played a couple fantastic moves. I did a US Chess School lecture last night on some of Ding's moves, and amazing player. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is just, this is an example, hopefully in humility here, that I looked at a lot of Ding's moves and I was like, oh, that's wrong. That's wrong, but I didn't know it was Ding. A lot of these moves, when a super GM plays them, if you don't realize that they're a super GM, you're just like, oh, that's just a bad move, man. And it's kind of an example of what Sarwan calls it, like, I don't know, actually has some phrase, but Patzer or a super GM move when it looks wrong, Okay. Yeah, the Randy Scandy for door. Okay, now before I start, I wanted to give a shout out for DM Hokie. He has been helping us with a lot of stuff, and when I moved this show from chess.com to here, the last couple months that were a little chaotic, he helped me organize the files. So I'm going to give a shout out. That really is helpful because I am not, oh my God, it was hard for me last month to get the files all in order. So we're going to start off with some dojo battles that were played here on our Discord server. I want to give it, our Discord server is amazing. You can find a game there with someone who's not going to cheat, or probably not going to cheat, at a long time control. And then, there's a culture of going over the games a little bit. Afterwards, we're going to start with those. Then we're going to do the rest of the games that were submitted. And then we'll finish off with WMI LLTI. Okay. So he's going to organize D&D JoJo. All right. One thing I try to do is I got this thing and I often blow it. I often blow it completely and then I forget to go back to my scene. So hopefully I'm not going to do that today. We have 11 games, which isn't that much for this epic show. And that's good because it means I feel like I can be a little less rushed. Okay, so let's get into it. 100 bits for the doki. For the doki and the hokey. So we're going to start off with Douglas against, let's call him Julio. He might be Giulio, but we're going to call him Julio. And this is played in a dojo event. Got to turn off my sounds here. And one of the things I got to say that's I feel chess has truly evolved is we're going to see some games today from people who are not that high rated, but who played at a very high level. And what I mean by that is like, I'm used to, I've played chess for decades. And I want to say in general, when I play somebody who is a 1900 or something like that, they'll make a mistake usually fairly early on and it'll be obvious. But now I'm looking at a lot of these games, I gotta say, like people who are rated, 1900, 2000, 2100, they're putting together really good games. And we're gonna see a lot of that today. So let's get into it. One fun thing about this position is we have transposed to a famous game that I've spent a lot of time on, which is Talbot Vinnick, and I think it's game 11 from the 1960 match. I always get the numbers wrong. I don't have the mind to remember the numbers, but I think it's game 11, where Tal won a fantastic game. And I've used it as a study game, and we're going to deviate it from right here. But I'm going to chat a little bit, actually, just about various things. And what I think is a fun thing to do as just an exercise for everybody out there is, what should black do? It's actually a huge jumping off point here for black. What should black do? You want me to buy a few buttons, buddy? It's hot in here, man. It's hot. It's very hot today. The summer kind of finally broke. And I need to bring up my air conditioning unit. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, what should black do? This transposed, and by the way, is a little bit different in the tall game where knight e4 was played to induce d4 earlier, but knight e4 here is fine. What should black play? Very interesting position. Like I said, I've analyzed with a lot of talented juniors and others in this position to think about what is, what is good chess and what is planning. Drittman's got bishop f5, and we got to say bishop f5 is certainly on the radar as a move. Yeah. Not a bad gut reaction to play bishop f5. That's right. Very interesting position. I thought about this forever before I came up with what I thought. I'll tell you what Botvinnik played. Botvinnik played bishop e6 in this position. And it looks kind of weird, but the motivation, and this might help us understand what's going to happen in White's game, is that after knight d2, we want to take and then say, oh, right, you're going to have to go backwards if you want to deal with this pawn. And the problem then became that in this position, Tal didn't go backwards, and he played queen d2, which was the first of a couple surprises for Botvinnik in this position. And there's very fascinating variations involving this beautiful idea here that Tal gives in his book. In any case, that's a different game, but I wanted to point that out as one of the potential variations. Well, queen d2 is surprising because you're hanging the c-pawn. That's why I'm sure he didn't, and you're not going to play bishop e6 if you think that queen takes d2 is possible. Well, Tal didn't care about the pawn. Tal didn't care about the pawn. That's a beautiful game, by the way. That's just the beginning. Botvinnik didn't take the pawn. So in our game, Black played knight d7, which cannot be a bad move. But one of the reasons I think this is such an interesting position is that when I look at it, the bishop and the knight don't actually know where to go yet. It's a very fascinating situation. For example, you know, the knight going to d7, it really can't be terrible, but where is it going to go next? Are we just going to like bludgeon the e4 square? And is it that much better when, you know, that goes down? So that's a question, first of all, for Black. And obviously, if we take, then the knight will want to go to c6, right? So that's that. And the bishop also, I don't know. I don't know where the bishop wants to go. Sure, bishop f5, but it's, you know, are we going to play knight h4 and d7 next? I'm sure Black's still okay, but I don't really know what the pieces are doing. So a great move that I really like here is to say, you know what? Let's leave these dudes here just for a second and play a5 and ask White some simple questions about this a4 push. And in general, the cool idea is to say, if I can get the rook active in any way, then I don't have to rush with developing these guys. Because in a lot of ways, the bishop on c8 is already developed where it is. It's just that, you know, in a general sense of development, you got to move your bishop out to get the knight and the rook out, right? Okay, anyways, I wanted to tell you that story. I think it's an interesting training position, if you will. Okay, so here we go. Knight d7, and now I agree with you that knight d2 looks better than knight c3. And by the way, I'm going to flip the board because these are Giulio's notes. Okay, so knight d2 for sure, and you know, then we can talk about what the evaluation is there. And right, the reason that knight c3 is funny is it's not clear. Well, yeah, if we take like you did, then the bishop will be loose on c3, and just in a variety of ways, not just loose this way, but loose on the c file later. So it's just not clear that it wants to be there. But you know, White can still make an argument that he's better here, and it's true. This knight on d7 is not the bee's knees, as they like to say. Okay, so knight c3, knight b6. And right, you're giving White some interesting questions. In a way, not totally dissimilar from the questions Botvinnik was asking Tal. Like, just put a little pressure over there on that pawn and ask White what he wants to do. So this is a big moment for White. And we got to say that the controversy of knight b6 is, if we can somehow deal with the threat, then the b3 pawn, we can say, is dominating the knight. And White gets fancy here and plays bishop a5. And we got, whether it's right or wrong, we got to have some sympathy with this move. It certainly looks interesting, right? I think there is really a variety of moves here. Knight d2 is a very basic move you could do. Knight e5 is also very interesting. Do you really want to take on e5? I have questions there too. I'm not sure. And anyways, let's just play bishop a5. Let's just play bishop a5. And let's assume that black is doing okay here. At least that's my assumption. Bishop a5 takes c5. Okay, here we have it. For better, for worse, this is what black has gone for. And I think the critical variation would be e3 to try to hold the pawn. And Giulio gives this variation with queen c7. And yeah, to me, it looks like white is better, but we really have a mess. We really have a mess. By the way, one of the key themes of the Talbot-Vinnet game is that when we begin the game, when we begin the position, let's go back a couple moves. We begin this position. The key problem, or a key problem for white, is that the bishop is blunted. So, to a very large extent, any kind of movement of the d5 pawn is going to help. Any kind of movement of the c6 pawn will also help. And that's part of the reason, I think, behind Tal's intuition in this position, that it is one of the many reasons we have compensation, is because our bishop now has attained more scope. Okay, so here we go. Interesting. Snippos, snippos, c5, snip. Oh man, here we go. Takes, knight c4, bishop c7, and now we just have basic questions. Who's better and why? It's very hard to judge. I feel like this is a very difficult position. Black is very close to just equalizing, but he's also just very close to being significantly worse. If he can, basically, if he can achieve rook c8, he's going to be doing great, but it's difficult. Okay. So, bishop g4. I looked at this position for a while. It was not obvious to me what we're supposed to do. Any bishop move besides bishop g4 is going to get whacked by stuff like knight d4. And maybe it's possible, but it's going to be hard. Life is going to be hard. So bishop g4, rook b1. Looks good to me. Looks good to me, yeah. Okay, and now b6, which you gave a funny looking move mark to, but it certainly seems intuitive to play b6. And you write, my opponent was worried about bishop b2. And that truly might be a hell of a move. That truly might be a hell of a move. I don't know. Now, I assume, well, I don't want to assume that you've checked it with the computer, but it certainly looks unstable on bishop b2, right? So knight d2, definitely a mistake. And we could consider, certainly, though, bishop f4 followed by knight d2, right? And then I don't know what's happening. No idea. Yeah, no idea. a mess. Okay, but bishop b2 certainly would have been interesting. And I guess the point is, in this position, that we got to say that white is at least the one that's pressing. Is it very complicated? It is. It is. Okay, so you still have problems. b6. All right, next critical moment for black. I kind of like b6 as a move, by the way. Right? It's a very simple idea that if he trades everything off, you're going to at least have the bishops. Rook b4. Another nice move. And yeah, I'm sure that came as a little bit of a shock. Snip. Now here, right, it definitely seems like you're doing it too quickly, right? That there's no need to play bishop f3 yet, right? And let's go through your variation. C takes. Knight takes. Pawn, bishop, boom. You talked about bishop a7 as well. Now, one thing that'll be interesting is that you kind of have an approach to this position where you think it's equal, and I don't. I don't think it's equal. Okay, so bishop f3. Oh man, it's hot. Now you say, sad, but objectively it's still a draw for sure. I don't know. I don't know it's still objectively a draw for sure. And further, you know, he might have some, you mentioned bishop f4, rook c2, a4. Okay, I'll believe it. I'll believe that. Even that one, there might be some way for the guy to keep playing. But let's focus on our position, right? Which is this one. And you write, I had no doubt this was a draw, but the a pawn combined with the right color bishop, i.e. the color of the bishop with the queening square, could be very dangerous. Yeah, so horrendously difficult ending here. And let's say the good news for you is that it's hard for him to put the rook behind the pawn. The other good news for you is that you can shut down his counterplay with e6. The good news for him is he can shut down your counterplay with e3. Right? And by counterplay, I just mean this is the weak point. And white is, to win, white is going to need two weaknesses. This counts as one for sure. And the other, he needs something over here on the king's side. He needs to be able to tickle you a little bit. And all I know for sure is that in these positions, people are going to make mistakes. So whether it's a draw or objectively or not, I know that even strong players here are going to blow it. You know, it's just, and a strong player also as white is going to, he's going to give you the business. You know, he's going to work you a little bit. Okay, so here we go. Rook c2, a4. Now, one approach for white that I think might have been interesting would be to say, hey, let's not allow the rook behind the pawn, and let's play rook a6 with the intention of e3, which I want to do anyway, and then either bishop d5 b3 or bishop d1 b3. And the key thing I guess I would want to stress is the simple point that if white's going to win the game, he needs two weaknesses. And the pushing the pawn is ultimately not going to be enough because you're going to get stuck on a4, right? Now we're still going to keep going. It's still going to be interesting. I was just saying what I thought would have been a better move practically. And I think there's a common misconception about bishops of opposite color endings as being simply drawn. And no, no. I think that's a conception that arises because there are a number of opposite color bishop positions where one side is up a pawn, but all the other pieces are gone, right? And then the bishop can blockade the pawns easily. But especially here, if either side gets an attack on their color, then white has great play. And we can even, if white finds some way to give you the business on the king side, then you are lost. Or I would call this a clear advantage for white. Okay, a4. Right. So Mr. Proust analyzed this. The conclusion was that white had multiple ways to press for a win, like pushing h4, h5, sacrifice the e2 pawn, and attack there somewhere with rook f7, king f7, and yada yada. Okay. So bishop c3. I'm not sure. There's no rush. One thing about this is that now that the pawn's on a4, my bishop on f3, it's harder for it to find a natural spot on this diagonal, a supported spot, right? So white's task is a little bit trickier now about what to do with the bishop. Okay. I feel pretty good in saying that e3 is probably the right move here. Yeah, it's not easy to do this as white, but e3, right? E3 seems right, and for black too, e6 should be played. All right, rook d1, rook b8, rook c6. Weird, but he's frustrated. Okay, these guys are a little bit pushing the clock. Let's read what you wrote. Apparently my opponent was also biased against keeping the rook in front of the pawn, but I think he should have left it there. I think it's already hard for white to make progress, but I had a clear choice between bishop b4, apparently winning a pawn, and rook b4. Let's just say, I think as a general rule of thumb, there are three places for the rook. There's behind the pawn, and that's the best, whether you're the defender, as black is with rook a2. There is beside the pawn, like here, rook c4. There's in front of the pawn, rook a6. In general, that's the order of goodness to badness, right? Behind is best, to the side is second best, and in front is worse. Notice when white played a4, the scope of his rook actually went down. So I'm okay with this attempt with rook c4. And I think it's not easy. You're not going to win the pawn. It's on the light square, So here, controversial. Here, and here's an interesting moment here, right? Black, here's the thing. Here's some good piece of advice. If you believe that this was drawn, then you shouldn't have gone to go start snipping pawns. Because maybe you can hold this thing, but I don't know, man. This, to me, looks creepy majeepy. This is creepy majeepy. I don't get it. Yeah, I don't get it. I don't understand why we can't play like king g2, e3, bishop d1, and in the meantime, dude can't move. You got to be a little careful. Okay, let me just... Yeah, no, I don't get it. King g2. Play king g2 or e3 or something. Crispy critters. We're pinning. They call it. They teach the kids pin and win. That's what they tell them. They say pin and win, man. Pin and win. Okay, so g4 exclam. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I'm not sure I get that either. Okay. King e5 panic. Yeah, I don't understand any of these moves. All right, good. White prematurely plays this bishop c2, but he's maybe still winning. Good move. Snip, and now no one knows. Now no one knows. Except, yeah, what are you doing? Yeah. So, rook h2. Now, maybe that was some really difficult thing that White did the way he did it. I didn't understand White's moves. But it's true, there's some drawing chances in this position for Black, but basically it's lost. I think. It's basically lost. Okay, and then as it was, that's a piece down. Piece gone. Okay, let's move on to the next game. A very good fight, and I think part of becoming a better chess player is just to understand these end games, and when you say stuff like, "Oh, it's a draw," you got to realize, like, no, you imagine you're playing like some monster, or it doesn't even have to be a monster, just somebody who's ready to hurt you. They're gonna work you, man. They're gonna work you in that position, and even if it's some way a theoretical draw, I don't know. Okay, so let's move on to the next game. Here we go. This is also a dojo fight, and this is also Black playing, annotating, and playing then my endgame repertoire. It's kind of interesting. I've seen it been played. I feel like it's been played more, not just at variety of levels. I've been seeing it, and maybe I'm just noticing it now because I studied it and did a little video on it. But in general, right, it just seems like it's more popular. Okay, so there, White plays rook g1, and it seems strange to me. I'm sure it's a move, but it's strange because g4 directly by White achieves most of the same ends, and knight takes g4 seems very scary. Okay. Now, I believe in the video I did that I recommended g4, g6 as just a simple and solid way to play. Okay, so rook g1, it's not, since obviously rook g1 wants the benefits of g4 without the risk of knight takes g4 itself, right? And if you don't want the risks of g4, you probably shouldn't be, you're not the kind of dude who wants to be playing g4 in this position anyway, right? Because g4, you're a man like Shirov, you're going for it. And so this is going to take you more time, plus it's not clear that the rook belongs on g1. Okay, so good move. g6 is, as you wrote, also fine immediately. g6, good. Bishop e3. And you write, it's confounding that White doesn't take the opportunity to misplace my knight with g5. The point of g4, no? Right, that is the point. And one of the things I'll say about this, one of the reasons I recommended this g6 move, which I believe Aronian played against MVL, is precisely that the White player after this is still going to be dreaming of an attack, when really the main benefit of their play is that you are dislocating the knight. Now, that knight is an opportunist, and he's dreaming about coming, after you kick him, and he's still dreaming of coming into f4, and it's a whole drama as to, whether or not we achieve it. By the way, c6 is in general always a good move because we're going to dominate this baby here, and White needs to be sensitive now that he's got a misplaced knight. Okay, now, is it confounding though? No. Thank you for leaving my knight in the center. Leave it there as long as you want, buddy. And as we'll see, it's a tactical problem for White the longer he leaves it there. So boom, Boom. Apparently this is a novelty. And it's just a little weird not to push g5, but I assume he could do it at any moment. Castles, castles, and now black has a question. Let's say some obvious stuff. In the regular line with g5, knight h5, there becomes this really tricky thing where with knight h5, we put a plug on white's ambitions on the king side, but we're essentially kind of down a piece over there. But with that plug, we have free reign to start our opposite side's attack on the queen side. As we've talked on this show many times, with opposite sides castling, the value of the initiative goes up. And we have a chat note, b5 looks dangerous. Absolutely. Absolutely looks dangerous. We also have e takes d4. And the nice thing about e takes d4 is it would tell white, be like, hey, buddy, you forgot. You forgot to move the g pawn. And this is the variation we got here. And now I guess we're fine. We have to worry a little bit about bishop f4, but I think bishop f4 probably like c5 or something's going to be possible. I love here the remark pawns aren't people, and it's a good thing to always realize that, in this position, it's all about the activity of the pieces. And right here, you had every opportunity to blow it open. Now, I would say queen a5, in terms of, let's say, the vocabulary of the position, it can't be that wrong. And b5 would certainly be the thematic way to play the position, right? In fact, I believe that if you had played b5, g5, knight h5, you would be transposing to games, but you'd be up a tempo. You'd be up a tempo because this rook came here and no one knows what it's doing there. It could be on h1, So anyways, b5 is certainly a move. And I like black because I think white has lost a tempo compared to the main line. Though I'm sure rook g1, if you look in the database, I'm sure some people have played, as you notice, it's a novelty, only around queen d2. So I'm sure, it's not totally lost or anything. It just seems, let me just express it. Whenever you have opposite sides castling, the loss of a tempo is more significant. And that's why this rook g1 seems especially incorrect to me. Okay. Queen a5, and I think we're going to see that there is a problem with this move, and white himself sets himself up for it with king b1, but then doesn't deal with it. And that is that white could now think about releasing basically freeing his bad knight. And first he plays DE, and here, knight d5. And I love what you write, is an ingenious way of trading off the dominated c3 knight. And there's so many positions where this trick happens. A lot of Sicilians, for example, you get this trick. And I think the question, there's just kind of some problems involved. If queen d8, knight f6, and we can't play knight f6, for example. And as you wrote, queen d2, check to the miserable king, king h8, bishop b7, g5, and if you play knight h5, what you have then is the bad ending, right? And you give knight h5, knight c4, right? Now we should also say even knight b3 would be a bad position for black, simply because as long as we don't lose the knight on e7, our endgame is going to be better because the knight's a little funny, and our king will ultimately be better too. But of course, knight c4 is nice. Okay, so now things are going to take a turn on the wild side. Queen d6. Okay, obviously a total mess. And one, let's say, puzzle rush like thing maybe you could have observed here is just that he's getting a little frisky. He's getting a little frisky, and at some point, some kind of rook d8 is really looking at him in the face. And yeah, this I would say as black is like your critical moment, your moment to really think about what's going on, and also to feel that white's position is suspicious, or as the millennials say, sus. This position is sus. And you start off with a good move. Boom. 92. And let's just say something obvious. You are the one with the initiative in this position. This whole clump of pieces over here, nobody knows what it's doing. I don't know what it's doing. And you really have just one problem, and that's dealing with this pawn. And you give a nice variation with knight g4, knight f6, bishop e6, and then, you know, this kind of thing. Toast. My suspicion is that there are other moves here as well for you, you know, and I'm not even sure what they are, but knight b6, we could think about, you know, all kinds of moves. And your move, it's questionable how bad it actually is. We're going to get into it. g5, you wanted knight c1, and you're writing black can't move. I don't know. I'm not sure about any of it. Knight e4, queen d7, rook d8. I don't know. But he plays g5 finally. Kind of weird. And you wanted then rook a d8. Now maybe that was a computer line, but this is definitely a human move. Knight takes e4. But we should say the whole reason why, well, not the whole reason, but a big reason why this whole thing is sus is that, right, you should say to yourself, oh, that d1 rook, man, what a loser. What a loser. And it's kind of what you're doing too with knight e4. And right, now you do a weird thing and you play rook f d8 instead of rook a d8. And maybe, I guess maybe you just thought it was the same thing. Your position's still going to be good, but the problem, of course, is then when you take on d1, you're going to have to deal with it, right? So here's the variation you give. And I just want to say before we go further here that just intuitively you're winning this position, right? Because yes, he's got the two minors, but that rook on d1 is a bad man. And if he trades his rook, as we know from many shows here, it's generally a bad thing. So, right, if rook f d8, we're going to get the game. That's an interesting situation too, because remember, in the game, the rook is going to be tagged, so it has to move, right? Whereas here, we have just a wider variety of moves, and then black, you know, he writes about knight d6. And let's just say, right, that's, I don't, you know, when you're in this position, my God, let's just say it's a really hectic situation. And so the problem you could describe as a practical one, where you say to yourself, of course I'm playing rook d8, and I just want to avoid being tagged, so when we get there, I'll be able to see what I can do, man. Okay, so here we go. Boom. 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 Now I gotta say, to me, it still looks pretty interesting. And you write queen c6 and advantage white. And maybe it is an advantage white. And I guess a lot of it has to do with the fact that my knight on e4 is very uncomfortable. But, you know, it's still a very sus position, this thing that white's got going on here. Bishop c4, check to the miserable queen. Rook c8. And then, right, then that's a bad one. Whereas you write a nice variation, Rook G1, Knight G1. Look at those terrible knights he's got. E4. And you write black has compensation. Absolutely, you got compensation. Absolutely, I love this for you. This is beautiful. Look at that. Look at those knights. They're so terrible. Okay, so boom. Oh wait, let's go. Let's not do that. I have a feeling some of these they feel a little computery. Boom, 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 and now plus minus. I'm trying to evaluate how plus minus it is. I actually had some students playing a game in a similar material constellation, and white is winning, but there's some practical problems that the person with the pieces has to solve, whereas the queen gets to bounce around. And there's even kind of a common prejudice amongst a certain level of player, which just does not want the pieces because they know it's harder and they know they can get picked off because they know they can get picked off. All right, that looks correct. That looks correct. That looks okay. That doesn't. That looks like either a winning move or a losing move, and in fact, it was a losing move. Now, the question would be: is it totally lost? From a theoretical standpoint, yeah, it's totally lost. But think about it this way: your opponent has just played a weird move. Now, I get it; they have a dirty trick in mind, but was that really the move to gain complete coordination? That's a little suspect as a coordinating move, you know? And if you do something to fix your king, well, then eventually you'll threaten some other, you threaten the H2 pawn and stuff. Okay, so those are our dojo battles. Let's take a look at what we got coming on next, and I'll try to pay a little bit more attention to the chat.